This is episode 2 of 7, and in this episode we'll build out a basic RESTful API using the Slim framework. This will include setting up routes for common CRUD operations and making sure our API follows REST principles. Welcome back to a new episode of DevDrawer. This is going to be a continuation of our previous video, where in the previous video I showed you how to install Slim and how to set up a database connection and how to test that database connection as an API. So if we type in db test, we can see that we're successfully connecting to our external database. So I won't go into detail about all of that, but stay tuned because now we're actually going to build out a functional API that pulls from tables inside of a database. So let's get started. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some code that you can run inside of your MySQL, PHP admin, whatever it is. But basically we're going to run this code. So we're going to do a create table. And then we're just going to call it items. And then inside of this, we're going to create an ID, which is going to be int. It's going to be auto increment. So increment, and it's also going to be the primary key. And then we're going to do a name, which is going to be a varchar. And let's just set it at 255. Make it where it's not null. And then a description, where it's going to be a varchar. No, let's not do that. Let's do text instead. Make it not null as well. And then let's do a create it at, let's do timestamp. And the default is going to be current timestamp. Okay, so if you type this out, you can copy and paste it into the SQL window or inside of your SSH connection, whichever one you want to do. And basically this will create the foundational structure for our database. I've already created it, but because my database is on a local dev server that I use, I'm not going to show you the database just because it does have other tables in it that are private for other things that I do. So for right now, just take this code, copy and paste it into your PHP myadmin or your SSH and run it, and it should create you a table that you can use for the remainder of this project. So here, before I cancel this, I'm going to pause for a second so you can copy and paste the entire thing, or copy it down and then run it in your window, make sure it works. And create it at. Okay, so now that that's done, let's go ahead. We're not going to save that. Let's go ahead and start creating these this information that we need. So we have our test controller from last time that connects to the database and does our hello world. So we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call this item controller, because this is what we called our database table. So whenever you go to create other things like posts or pages or whatever, you would create an individual controller for each one of those. But for what I'm doing, we're going to be doing the item controller, just so I can kind of show you some simplistic way of doing it. All right, so now let's go down here and we're going to create our namespace. It's going to be app, and then it's going to be inside of the controllers. And we're going to be kind of using from our test, we're going to be using this response and this request the same way that we are. So let's go ahead and do that. We're also going to be using the app database, just like we did in our test. And then again, we're going to be using PDO. Okay, so now let's create our routes, or our class first. So item controller. Okay, so now let's create our individual functions for each one of our routes. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a public function get item by ID. And then this is going to have the request. And let me minimize this so we can see. So we're going to do request. And then we're going to do response. And then the args. Okay, so we're going to do get item by ID. And I'm going to copy this down because we're going to be doing the other ones just like it. So get item by ID. And then we're going to do another one where we can create an item. So we're essentially doing the CRUD. So create, update, read, and delete. So we're going to do create item. And then we're going to do an update item. And then finally, we're going to do a delete item. Okay, so this is going to be our functionality for it, and it's pretty much going to be the same outside of what it actually does. So once I get the functionality written for this one, we should be able to kind of replicate that down. So let's do first is we're going to establish our database. This is going to be new database. I capitalize that, but new database. And then our connection is going to be equal to db connect. And again, this information can be found inside of our database.php. So we're using the connect field here, which is passing all of our information in that we're gathering from our environment file. So let's keep going. So now we're going to set up our query. And I think our query, we're just going to do connection query. And then let's just do a select all from items. And then let's set up our response. Just get body. And then we're just going to write out the JSON encode. Wait, there's something I'm missing here. Oh, that's right. I got to do the items. So items equals query fetch all PDO fetch associative. Okay, now we can do our JSON encode items. And then finally, we're going to return our response with a header. And let me minimize this again so we can see what we're doing. So return response with header, and we're going to return it as JSON. So content type application JSON. Okay, so this is going to be our very first one. And if we want, let me open up a new terminal here and CD API. So actually, we only need a CD API into that. Since we have this new controller, I'm going to do composer dump autoload app. Let's see, it needs to be auto load. And that'll make it where we can use our item controller inside of our index.php. So now, if we go to our index.php, we can start creating these routes that we need inside of it. So let's go down here and do items routes. So let's kind of mimic what we have on the first one. So we're going to do a get for this one, but we need to define our controller. So we're going to do use app controllers, and we called it item controller. I think we called it item controller. Controllers, item controller. Okay. So now let's do our item controller equals new item controller. And then down here for our get, let's just do slash items, and then we're going to mimic what we did in the first one. So this is going to be an item controller, and we're going to pass in this first method that we created, which is get item by ID. No, that's we need to get all items. I think I might have, yep, okay. So that's fine. Let's copy this, paste it down. We need to get all items. I was looking at my reference code and it was not what I was expecting. Okay, so now we have our get all items, and so get all items. So this is going to be our very first one. Now in theory we should be able to test this pretty easily. Let me find my reference code. Okay, so let's use curl, and we're running localhost 8000, so http localhost 8000 and then /items. Content is blank, which is what we're looking for. So it is, you know, there's nothing in the database, obviously, so it's not showing anything. Let's go back and look at our item controller. Make sure that we are responding, response get body, right, JSON encode, items. Okay, everything looks like it's good here. So now let's do the same thing that we did, but for item by ID. So in order to get the item by ID, we have to first define the ID, which is going to be our args ID. And then that argument is going to come from when we go to do, so I think if we do items right now, you know, it's returning nothing. So we should be able to do, I think it's going to be item/ID, which we'll get there in just a second. But essentially it's coming from the URL structure. Clean this up a little bit. All right, so now we're going to select from items where ID equals ID, and then we're going to do, let's change this to statement because we're not doing the query fetch all anymore. Let's see, we're going to do statement execute, and we're going to pass in that ID, which is going to be equal to the ID that we declared up top. And then instead of doing fetch all, we're just going to do a fetch because we're only fetching one. And now we're going to do if item, we want it to respond or set the body, the response here. So we're going to do response get body, right, JSON encode item. And then let's see, else. So if it doesn't exist, we want it to write that there's an error that's happening. So we're going to do response get body, right, JSON encode, and then we're going to pass in error, and that error is going to be equal to item not found. And then we want to do a return so we're going to do a return response with status, and we're just going to pass a 404. Otherwise, we're going to return with header application JSON. So now, in theory, if there was an item, we should be able to do, well, no, we can't do it yet. We have to write out the actual code for it. And right here, so we're going to do app get, because these are they're get request. So we're going to do /items /ID, and then we're going to pass in item controller get item by ID. Is that what I called it? Get item by ID is correct. Okay, so now, and actually I want to do this a different way. So we're going to group these. So let's do app group, and that way we don't have to type out items every single time. We do items and then function group use item controller, and then inside of this we're going to take these and let's change them up a little bit. So items, so we don't need anything here because it's already grabbing the items. And then item controller, get all items. So this one we just need to do ID. Let's go ahead and set up the other ones as well. So we're going to do a post, which again doesn't need anything because it's going to be doing that. And let's see what our next create item. So this one's going to be create item, and then the other one should be similar. So for our update, it's going to be a put, and it's going to be again passing the ID, and this is going to be update item. And then finally we're going to have a delete, where it's going to be passing in again the ID, and this one is going to be delete. This actually does not need to be app any longer. This needs to be group because we're passing the group. Okay, so now we have our group on here. See, get, post, get, put, delete. Okay, so now let's go back to our information here, and we are essentially going to be copying down the same thing for update item, but we're going to be modifying it a little bit. So we're going to be passing in the args, and then we're also going to be passing in the data that gets passed to it. So if we do a request, and then this is going to be get parsed body, which will be getting the JSON that we add to the body. And then we're going to be doing the database, the connection. We're going to be doing, let's do, instead of up here, query should be prepare, because we're preparing the query down here. Let me make sure that's right. So prepare, execute, fetch. Okay. So same thing here, because we're preparing this query. So prepare. Then we're going to be doing an update statement. So update items set name equals name. And let me get my word wrap working on this. There we go. So you can see it. Okay, so update name. And okay. So let's see where are we at. Update name, description, and I think that was it. What did we see? Items, name, description, ID. Okay. Then for our execute statement, going to be passing in the ID. And let's go ahead and pass in the other stuff first. So name, and this is going to be name, description, it's going to be description, and the ID is being passed in. So we're going to execute our statement. And then we don't need to get anything from it. So let's go ahead and remove that. And for our JSON encode here, we're going to do success item updated. Item updated successfully. And then we're going to respond with that. Okay, so now let's copy this because we're probably going to reuse some of it. And we're going to go up here. And instead of update, it's going to be insert into name description. Name description. Where is gone. It's going to become values. Name. Name description. Okay. Now let's execute. We don't need the ID any longer. And then we're going to do response get body item created successfully. And then again, we're going to push it out. And then finally, let's do the delete. So again, let's copy this. Did I remove the ID? Nope, I did not. So for our create item, we're just going to be getting the parsed body and then preparing it. Okay, so now let's go down to our delete. We're going to copy and paste that. And we don't have a parsed body anymore, but we are going to be using the ID. So now let's do delete from items where ID equals ID. And then we just need to pass in the ID and then change this to item deleted successfully. So now let's run our items one. That should cause an error. Yeah, undefined variable query. Okay, so the biggest issue was that it was trying to run it in PowerShell, which I did not want it to run in PowerShell. It's just PowerShell was the default one that came up. So with PowerShell, you have to rewrite that command. So I'm going to run the command in git bash. However, in doing so, I was looking through some of the code and I noticed that some of the information like in the create item is not correct. Like for example, we're grabbing the data, but we're not using the data. So these variables don't actually exist. So we have to make sure that we pass them, which we have to do the same thing to these as well, because those aren't variables until we do this. Okay, so now they're actual variables pulling from the data. So let's cd into our API here, and then I'm going to try to run my code again. So test item, this is a test, and if we run that, it should work. Okay, so item created successfully. So now if we go over here to slash, let me see what that ID would be. I'm looking in my database right now, so it's ID 15. So 15, variable item, line 36. I'm assuming that's the same issue. We're trying to get a single item here, so let's refresh that. All right, there we go. So cool. Also, as part of my original design, I actually created the database so it has a blurb and active in it as well. So you could just add those fields to your database table. They will come in handy when we actually get into the React part of it. But for right now, I just have it where it's passing a null and active as default to 1. Okay, so now we got that working. Let's test the update one. So I'm going to copy and paste some code. So it's essentially the same thing. We are updating. We have to update ID 15. So let's go over here and update ID 15. And updated name, updated description. And if we run that, it should run. And then as soon as it gets done, hopefully, item updated successfully, we should be able to refresh this and see the new name. All right, well, looking through the code, we're declaring the ID here. It is not actually part of the data. So that actually needs to be an ID variable. So let's try to run that again. There we go. Now we have our updated name, the description's updated description. And then the blurb and the active is still unchanged because we're not modifying that yet. Okay, so finally, let's do the delete, which this should be fine. So let me see, where's my code to delete an item. So we're going to run this and it's ID 15. And if we go back one to items, now we have a blank controller line 90 where ID equals ID. That's what I get for copying and pasting instead of writing it out. Okay, item deleted successfully. So now we refresh, we got a blank. Okay, so now all of our methods are working as expected. We will add in some error handling, but not right now. Whenever we actually get to where we can display the error on the React side, we'll add in where it's not always returning a, like with the create item, it's not always returning a success, which kind of threw me off. But we should be able to view any of the routes that we have in there. And then once we get to that point, we'll start doing some try-catch blocks and stuff like that. But I think for this part, we're done. I know it was there was a few errors that happened. It's just because of the way I was writing the code. I was trying to make it quicker, but obviously making it quicker isn't always making it thorough. So just to kind of recap what we did here, we created a item controller that does our CRUD operations. So we get a single item, get all items, create an item, update an item, delete an item, and then we added those routes to get all the items, get the ID, so get it by ID, update with a post, or update with a put, create with a post, get all of them without the ID, and then finally delete with the ID. So this is in the simplistic terms of how you would create an API that has CRUD functionality in PHP using Slim. So in the next part of this, we're actually going to be continuing this to our episode 3, which is going to be setting up the React front end. In that episode, we're actually going to build out the React application. It's going to be in a separate folder. So our API is in a folder, and then we're going to have a front end folder that uses React, and it's going to be using this API in order to start working. So again, there was a few errors in here. Hopefully I was able to address all of them before this video ended, so you can kind of follow along with me. But yeah, so if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, tell me why you didn't like it, and I'll try to make it better next time. If you're not subscribed to the channel and you want to see the continuation of this series, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. But I think that's going to do it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.